To focus on that solution, I thought it would be good to kick off with a conversation with the fellow responsible for delivering services and platforms to you from the largest advertising company on the internet, and that is Google. So please join me in welcoming for a conversation Neal Mohan, the VP of Product at Google. Welcome. So Neal, this isn't our first
Indeed it is.
Dance around the maypole. But you guys have really given me a lot to work with over the last month or two, I have to say, in terms of a conversation. Neal and I did a little pre-call where I said, you know, get ready, because I'm going to ask you about some stuff that's been in the news. So why don't we dispense with that, at least up front, and then we can talk about some inside baseball.
Sure.
So next week I'm going to Washington, D.C. to do a little reporting for a book and to do a little talking to our elected representatives and hearing what they think of our industry. What are you doing next week?
I also happen to be in D.C. meeting with a number of different folks, including a number of our clients. I know what you're alluding to. So
all right, let me ask this question another way.
You can ask the direct question.
Google has now been investigated or is being investigated by a number of different government bodies for a number of things that may or may not be well understood by folks in Washington and Europe. But in particular, some news that was made recently had to do with a controversy around Apple's Safari browser, in particular the mobile version of it, and Google's going around the default privacy protections of that browser in order to place a third-party cookie so that you could run your ad systems, as I understand it, across that mobile environment. Why were you in such trouble for that?
So let me give you a little bit of background on that before and clarify actually a few things. I'm sure everybody kind of heard about that story. Everybody obviously is familiar with what Google is trying to do with +1. Many of you have probably seen that on Google advertisements that run across our AdSense network. We announced a few months ago that we would be serving those +1 overlays on top of our display ads across our Google Display network. And we would do that for users who had opted in. Many of you have been through the sign-up flow for that, had opted into personalization of content and advertising. And in an attempt to honor that user choice, we used what was essentially a known workaround in the instance of Safari to make a temporary connection with that user's account on the Safari browser, so we could do this type of personalization. As an unanticipated and unforeseen consequence of that, because of Safari's unique implementation, it also opened the door for our general third-party ad serving cookie, which happens to be the double-click cookie, and that led to a lot of the things that people read about. But I just wanted to clarify sort of the mechanism by which that happened and sort of what the unintended consequence there was. And of course, since then we've obviously begun sort of the remediation of that process. But really the intent was to honor what our users had told us they wanted to opt into in terms of personalization of both content as well as advertising.
This sort of raises an interesting question about the conflicting intention of what we view in this industry as the audience, or the user, as you put it, which is to say, on the one hand, they may say, sure, Google, I'm happy for you to bring my Google experience with me wherever I go on the web. And on the other hand, they say to Apple, knowingly or unknowingly, because this was a default setting as I understand it, no, I don't want that. And then where's the, how do you adjudicate that
Yeah,
conflict? You know, who's right, the browser or the experience with the service, in your case, Google+. Is that something that you plan to try to explain to regulators?
You know, it's a good question, and our relationship is with our users. There was an explicit sign-up process that our users went through. That's what we tried to honor in this particular instance. Of course, as you know, and as you've written about often, you know, all of this technology is complicated. Browsers, while often having sort of similar behavior, sometimes have sort of these unique characteristics. And our job, we believe, is to honor sort of what our users' choice was, and that's essentially what we attempted to do. You know, I probably shouldn't go into a lot more detail on this topic, but that's basically kind of, that was the intent, and then and obviously there was all the unintended consequences that came from
a fair amount
as
of
well.
public, at least I think Google's brand's taken a bit of a bruising lately. And a lot of it has been driven by what feels like a very focused, you know, attempt to make Google Plus work, to bring it to everybody, to integrate it with everything. And you can't but run into Google Plus now. It's in every service almost. You know, it's in YouTube, it's in the search, it's in the ads. Why?
You know, so let me give you sort of my characterization of sort of at least how we think about not just Google Plus, but our relationship with our users, at least internally. And the first thing that I'll say is a repeat of what you would hear from anybody, because it is true sort of to the culture within Google, that our focus is on our users, the relationship we have with those users. We know that we can make our products, all the products that we all use here in this room, whether it's search, whether it's Gmail, whether it's YouTube, a lot better when we know something about our users. You know, when our users, just to give you an example, are searching for travel a couple of months out, and if we know something about potential conflicts they may have because they're using you know, our calendar application, then we think it's a better experience if we can actually surface that at the time that they're making searches around that time period. And other, you know, plethora of examples like that that I'm sure we could all come up with in this room. And our efforts to personalize our services based on that type of information is something that is not limited to Google Plus or even really defined just by Google Plus. It's across the board, across all of these services, because we know that that's what makes those products dramatically better for our users. Our users tell us that,
yeah.
and that's the focus. And so, and that's a long-term focus, and that is going to be an objective of anybody who develops products within Google.
What I wonder is, that vision makes a lot of sense to me, but not necessarily that every service is a Google service. So the next speaker is Kevin from Instagram, right? Mm-hmm. And I have a bunch of photos on Instagram. I would super like it if I could see those photos when I searched on Google, mm-hmm. right? And frankly, I'd be more than happy to give you my social graph from mm-hmm. Facebook so you could use it on Google. But it seems the only way that that can happen now is that if you guys cut a deal with Facebook, not if I cut a deal with you.
Yeah.
Can we flip that model so the user's in charge of the data and can tell you, here it is, please use it under terms that I set?
Yeah, you know, as you can imagine, the use case that you described has to be something that all the parties that are involved need to ascribe to. And so, you know, Google can take a point of view on that, but just Google taking a point of view on that is not going to solve that use case for you.
You might move it forward, though. You guys are kind of big.
You know, the reality is, though, I mean, there's a lot of other big players out there. There's a lot of other players who make decisions with respect to their users that are, driven by whatever things that drive those decisions, and
Right.
we can really only control the direct relationship we have with our users, and that's what we're trying to do as
Right.
best as possible
Right.
with a number of the announcements that you've seen over the course of the last few months.
Well, I know that my Picasa photos are going to show up, and I have a lot of those as well. But it would
Right.
be just great if search once again was federated across all services, and it feels a bit like Google's being put into the same game that Apple's playing or that Facebook's playing, which
Yeah.
is a game of a walled garden.
I wouldn't, John, I really wouldn't characterize it that way. I think you have to go back to, the sort of core principles and the core products on which Google was founded. I mean, Google, from its earliest days, has been about the open web. Google wouldn't work if that didn't
Right.
exist. That has been the fundamental tenet of our core product. It's been a fundamental tenet of the way that we've developed subsequent products, whether it's Android, whether it's the business that I work on, which is our display advertising business, which obviously generates revenue for many folks in this room, has been designed as an open platform to make it so that the web thrives, and it's been a fundamental tenet, and I hope that we've proven that by the products and capabilities that we bring to market. So I would say really just the opposite of that in terms of kind of where we've come from. Obviously, when we have a relationship with our users, they've opted in to telling us something about themselves. We hold that sacrosanct. We want to maintain the privacy and the controls that users have over that. So we're of course going to honor that foremost. But the fundamental design principle of a lot of our products has truly been open, and that permeates throughout sort of the product design process.
You know, I
within the
give
company.
Google a lot of credit for that philosophy, for being open, but I think that you stumble on it when you do search results and you see only stuff from Google Plus and not stuff from your Facebook or Twitter feeds that are clearly more relevant. And you're not the search guy, and I understand that, but do you think in the future we may see a reintegration of the rest of that?
I'm going to go back to what I said before, John. We can try to deliver the best experience for our users, subject to what we can control.
Right.
We are not the only party in those relationships,
Right.
and I'll leave it at that.
And I swear I'll get off this now. So, and I want to leave questions to the audience, because I'm probably not getting to the inside baseball stuff as much as I'd want. In a few minutes, we'll invite you guys to do that. But you've got quite a stack now. You've been on a tear in terms of both acquisitions over the last couple of years and then integrations of those acquisitions. Describe for us, not necessarily all the services that you currently have, because that would take a long time, but do you feel like there are still holes in what your offerings are, and what are those holes, if you have any?
Yeah. Thanks, frankly, to the partnership that we have with a lot of the folks in the room, a lot of our other partners. I feel like, not just Google and our partners across, AdWords, AdSense, DoubleClick, have come a long way over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. The landscape is dramatically different. You've talked a lot yourself about audience and data and ways at more precisely allowing marketers to have conversations with users, new ways for publishers to generate more revenue. Obviously, you guys are publishers yourselves. You understand all those. The progress there has been dramatic. I mean, real-time bidding, as an example. The sophisticated yield management that publishers do. Those things didn't even exist a couple of years ago. And I think we're still in the very, very early days of a lot of the technology that we're all familiar with today. A question that I often get related to what you just said is, if you were focusing on a couple of areas, what are sort of the big unsolved problems as it relates to digital marketing in general? And I would say one of the biggest that we've been sort of noodling around on within Google is just in the general area of measurement. So we've done a tremendous amount to make it so that digital marketing performs. We all know it works. Our clients are understanding that it works. We're seeing the market that we're all in grow dramatically. But how do we get from sort of the $25 billion, or if you include search, obviously larger digital market that we have today, to something that's $200, $300, $400 billion over the course of the next few years? And what I would submit is finding more effective ways of actually measuring the efficacy of digital marketing. And I think that's one of the really big untapped opportunities over the course of the next, obviously the course of this year, but over the course of the next several years.
So are you committing Google to doing more in this space?
Yeah, I mean, and we haven't really talked a lot about this, but this is a really big area of focus for us in 2012 and going into the subsequent years. And let me give you a little bit example of sort of what I mean by that. Despite all the progress that we've made in terms of growing sort of the digital pie, bringing brands online, the efficacy of what we all try to do as both as publishers, advertisers, agencies, is still measured fundamentally in things like impressions and clicks and conversions. That's what everything kind of boils down to. And that, of course, works extremely well for a particular sliver of advertising, direct response, whether you're on search, whether you're doing that with display or affiliate programs or what have you. It doesn't really work very well if you are a brand advertiser. Those metrics might be important to you, but you care dramatically about a lot of other things. You care about reach, you care about frequency, you care about the types of audiences you're getting in front of. Fundamentally, what you care about is the lift that your brand is getting as you start to move your consumers down the funnel, or as you start to initiate that ongoing conversation with them. And those are some of the areas that we're exploring. How can we bring technology to actually fundamentally solve that problem? Similar to what AdWords did several years ago with really helping develop the click as a model to solve that for the direct response side of the business. So I'm extremely excited about it. I think it's going to take some time to get there, but that's a big area that we're focused on.
I want to switch it up a bit because there's just so much to talk about that is in your purview, and talk about YouTube for a minute. The monetization of YouTube, I don't think it's second only to Twitter in the years-long when's that going to happen. It seems like it's now happened/happening.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is pre-roll, which as a consumer makes me a bit grumpy. And I'm wondering, is that always going to be the primary model of monetization for YouTube?
Does Federated run pre-rolls?
Some. Okay. But I have to say that, not nearly as much as you. Advertisers, how many out there are advertisers who buy or run pre-rolls, publishers, advertisers? And I'm curious about this, not because I want to, slag pre-roll. As I understand it, mid-roll and post-roll actually perform far better because people are already in the content and then they're willing to take content from a marketer after they've had a taste. But when you just want to hear that one song to remember what the chords are, and you have to go through 30 seconds of something to get there, it feels very ungoogly, right? Because the original Google ad added value to the page, right? This takes away and interrupts, which is an old school model. Can we ever get past that in video, or do you think we're just stuck with that?
No, I think we can. How many folks in the room have heard of TrueView as a format? Okay, so I actually agree with a lot of what you said, and I think the fundamental, and I think every advertiser would say that they don't want to have an interruptive experience that is not actually bringing some value, whether it's entertainment value or some sort of emotional connection with their consumers. And advertisers tell us this as well. And so that's the reason why on the YouTube side, and we're actually going to bring this format to many of our publisher partners outside of YouTube that have video inventory, is a format called TrueView. And TrueView is something really simple. Basically what it means is if the user doesn't like the ad, they can skip it. Or if advertising is a means by which a particular type of video content is monetized, then maybe we should give the users a choice of the types of ads that they may or may not want to see. And fundamentally it means user choice. And this is something that we have been working with on YouTube over the course of the last year. It's grown dramatically, and our vision is that it should supplant all the other formats of video advertising on YouTube, and eventually, to the extent that it works for the rest of our video publisher partners across the internet as well. And what we've seen, the results are phenomenal, John. The advertisers are obviously willing to pay dramatically more, because if you don't skip the ad, that's sort of the equivalent of
they're getting the
affirmatively saying that the user is actually engaged. And we as a publisher on YouTube love it as well, because we think that that's the thing that's actually kind of striking the right balance between our users, advertisers.
I mean, users, I think, understand that there's a commercial relationship that's supporting this free content. It is about how do you integrate, how do you join that conversation without sort of walking through the door first and yelling.
And to be honest, it's a great
bringing
signal.
a bottle of wine.
It's a great signal back to our advertisers as well, which is, you know, if your ad gets skipped basically all the time, then it probably wasn't the right ad in the first place, and so you running it as a pre-roll probably wasn't adding that much value for you anyway.
Right. Please, if there are questions, raise your hand. Oh, we've got one here. So as the mic runner runs up, let me ask you one more. You're hitting at something that is one of the reasons that we named this conference Signal, is a signal from the consumer that they're ready, that they appreciate the input from a marketer. That's a signal, a conversational signal that they want to engage in a dialogue. The ad systems of Twitter integrate a signal similar to that, which is they say, you know, if it gets retweeted or favorited, then that ad is promoted. Similar to the signal that Google originally used, which was the click, as a quality signal for advertising. Do you think that signal can apply to, say, display advertising in general?
So
one of your fastest growing businesses?
So the short answer is that it actually already applies to our display advertising. So obviously we operate the Google Display Network. All the ads that run across, you know, the millions of sites that are part of it incorporate those signals. The click is one aspect of that. There are other signals that tell us about sort of the relevancy and usefulness of that particular ad. And so the short answer to your question is absolutely. We already use that signal. I personally believe that there's a whole slew of other types of signals that you can incorporate, because the ad is on this sort of kind of richer, larger sort of creative canvas. And so our vision is to incorporate those as well, including you know, potentially direct signals from our users. So that's absolutely part of the plan.
Hi, John, Neal, this has been a great and interesting discussion. I'm Catherine Posey, founder of Tech by Superwomen, up here visiting, much warmer from where I'm from, Alaska. My question is, Dick Costello just recently talked about how the atomic unit of Twitter's advertising is the tweet. So as Google's evolving the Google Plus model, what will be your atomic unit for ads?
So that's a good question, and I think the answer that I give there is that it actually depends, and fundamentally what it depends on is the context that our users are in. When our users are searching for something, they're in very different contexts. So there, obviously, what we've tried to do is make it so that the advertising model works hand in hand with kind of the organic search model, which obviously everybody here is familiar with. You know, you can imagine that as something similar for new products that are coming. For example, on YouTube, the atomic unit is something that incorporates video. So all the advertising that you see there, whether it's on the page or in the stream, has some sort of video element associated with it. And of course, across the web, where our display network runs, that's where I think the challenge is the hardest, because the web is obviously every single website is different. So what we try to do is fundamentally match up our advertising with the context that our users in. And so that's kind of the principled answer I'd give to your question.
I think the question is, though, when are you going to have ads running in Google+?
You know, I'm not going to comment in terms of sort of specific advertising within.
Next week, next month, next quarter, never? Sometimes?
You know, I can't talk about things that you know, they don't exist today.
Drat. So. Do we have other questions for Neal? Over here. Thanks. Here comes the mic. This is just for those folks on the web who want to hear your question.
Hi, Neal. It's Mark Skatovich of Piper Jaffray. The question is on the measurement side that you talked briefly about. Obviously, there are a lot of measurement players out there today. I'm just curious, do you look at, does Google have a different methodology, or are there flawed methodologies that are out there that you think you can improve upon? Is your sort of entrance there going to be via partnership or internal only?
Remember, we have the CEO and the CEO of Quantcast here, and the
Sure.
CMO of Nielsen.
And we work with
Be
both those
politic.
companies. We work with both those companies as partners, as they know. The answer that I'd give you is we think that there are some unique capabilities that we can bring to the market, not to replace anything that's out there, potentially to augment it, to give marketers sort of new insights, to make it potentially more actionable for them. So that's about all I should say right now, but that's kind of the tack that we're taking in terms of how can we actually make it dramatically more actionable, how can we make it so that it's comparable, they can have an adequate comparison with other channels that they work with, things like that.
Do we have another audience question? Just want to make sure I give everyone over here. Should have to unfortunately be the last one.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Stevens from Magnet Media. My question for you is really with Google. You have so many different display ads, search, G+. You have so many opportunities for people to advertise. You know, it gets a little confusing, and do you find that you're competing within Google for those dollars, and there's not sort of a holistic strategy or recommendation to a particular customer segment?
That's a great question. I do hear that from our advertisers and our agency partners. We'd like to get better about that. We'd like to give more systematic recommendations across all the opportunities we have, whether it's video, traditional display, mobile now increasingly with tablets and smartphones, and of course search. I'll leave it at that. We are working very hard at that. It's actually very related to the measurement point that I brought up before, because you need to be able to measure effectively and comparably across all these channels before you make any sort of recommendation or planning point. That's a big area of focus for us.
Thanks for the question. I wish we had more time, but I appreciate you coming here and for another lap around this.
It's always fun, Don.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, everybody.